Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, friends, brothers and sisters. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this breakout room session where we are focusing on, on reparatory justice and Pan-Africanism. We have amongst us here a panel made up of distinguished personalities that can help us to engage with this particular theme. So let me just quickly note that in our in this session we have the panelists as follows. We have Mohammed El Naim, and I see Mohammed is in. We also have Eric Philip. Eric, are you in? Eric is possibly not in. I'm not yet, maybe still trying to connect. And then we have Dr. Justina Caicedo Salcedo. I saw her before, I think she's in, yes. And then we have Reverend Ron Daniels. Maybe we ask each panelist to introduce themselves. That way it becomes easier also. So they tell us who they are, and then we can go into the panel discussion. So I will just highlight why this is such a critical discussion, and a discussion not only for the present, but for the future of us as people of African descent. I am obviously borrowing from the brilliant scholar that President Thabo Mbeki is, when he suggested that maybe this idea of Africans and Africans in the diaspora is in itself not serving us in any particular way, rather complicating things by creating distinctions and categories that may not be beneficial to all of us. But I want to, just before I ask our panelists to introduce themselves, to bring to your attention an understanding of justice in a way that I saw when growing up. Each time in my village, when a conflict arose, either someone's cattle had fed on in somebody's field, or there was some misunderstanding between families or between individuals, there was always the institution or the platform of Padare or Dare. And for those that participated in the 1998 8th Assembly of the World Council of Churches, they would know that the platform for conversations during this assembly was called Padare. I will write that in the chat so that those that don't speak my mother language can also see what I'm talking about here. So Padare is a word that basically means a court or a platform for discussion. Now, at this discussion, this is where the community came together to discuss issues affecting the community, including reconciling feuding parties. Whenever somebody was wronged, our elders would gather with the alleged offender and the offended, discussed the offense. If it was established that indeed an offense had occurred, the elders would decide on how to reconcile these parties. The idea of justice was not to punish the offender, but to restore the relationship that existed before the offense, to re-establish community harmony. The offender would be asked to compensate the victim, not as a punishment, but as a recognition of the hurt caused. And the compensation ranged from helping the victim with plowing the fields, purchasing grain seed, making available some grain after harvest, providing a wife, cattle, goats, or chickens. It could be anything. But there was no standard reparation bill. Reparations depended on the offense. The success of this system relied heavily on the goodwill of the offender to be reconciled to their victim, and the victim's commitment to be reconciled to the offender. The offender and victim felt assured, if they believed in the impartiality of the Council of Elders, for them to embrace the resolution and the community would be restored, which was the goal of reparatory justice for our elders. It was not to punish, it was to restore a harmonious relationship within the community. Brothers and sisters, we are in this platform to further interrogate what it means to be Pan-Africanist, what it means to pursue reparatory justice, and indeed, how we can do it, particularly realizing that we are in a context where our claims are contested by the offenders. Our pain is sometimes minimized, undermined by those that inflicted it. How can we make progress? Worst of all, even when sometimes we do not trust each other that we are one, as President Mbeki suggested yesterday. How do we proceed? Now, let me take this opportunity to recognize our panelists that are in the house. And I see also a lot of participants that are in this house that we are talking to. To the participants, please, you can put in questions into the chat that I can put to the panelists as we discuss, as we engage, as we allow our panelists to share with us things that they want to share with us on reparatory justice and Pan-Africanism. I will begin by inviting Eric Phillips, who will introduce himself and then share with us on reparatory justice and Pan-Africanism. Thank you. My brother, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening from Guyana, from the Caribbean. My name is Eric Phillips. I'm a Guyanese-born American citizen living in Guyana. I'm a White House fellow. I'm the chairman of the Ghana Reparations Committee and a vice chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. I have 3 different degrees, but most of my work now is in reparations. And I've lived in South Africa for 7 years and of course visited over 40 countries. Our topic is reparatory justice and Pan-Africanism. You know, there's a deeply profound African proverb which states, if we stand tall, we will succeed because we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. More recently, Benjamin E. Mays made the statement, we stand on the shoulders of our predecessors who have gone before us. We, as their successors, must carry the torch of freedom and liberty passed on to us by our ancestors. We simply cannot lose this battle. So today we stand on the shoulders of Marcus Garvey, who laid forth a vision for a new world, a world where all people of African origin on every continent were united, self-sufficient, and proud. This was the visionary clarity of Marcus Garvey and a manifestation of the idea known as Pan-Africanism. So we stand on the mighty shoulders of the early thought leaders such as Henry Sylvester Williams, Ida Gibbs Hunt, Paul Robeson, Ras McConan, George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, Nanda Azikiwe, Jomo Kenyatta. In terms of reparatory justice, we stand on the mammoth shoulders of Chief Abiola, Gracia Machel, Miriam Makeba, Ali Mazrou, Dudley Thompson, who were part of the group of eminent people. You know, it was Ali Mohammed Osman Yassin, Minister of Justice of Sudan, who made a statement about the slave trade. He said Africa's economic marginalization started with the deprivation of its manpower by slave trade, followed by uneven exploitation and the siphoning of its natural resources during the colonial era. It's culminating today in economic globalization, where Africa lacks the capacity to compete commercially in the world's economy. But slavery was a transformative economic event of today's global economy. It transformed Europe from a fruit-and agrarian economy into an industrial superpower. It took Europe from the Dark Ages into a period of unprecedented growth, which created the foundation of Europe's economic, social, political, diplomatic, and cultural ascendancy. Slavery was the beginning of pure and cold, uncontrolled capitalism and rampant globalization. Slavery was pure business. It lacked morality, lacked humanity. It embraced unimaginable exploitation, human destruction. Millions of our ancestors died, and simply was the greatest crime on earth. Slavery was the first nuclear bomb of the world. Slavery annihilated Africa, African culture, African family structures, African institutions, African commerce, African growth, African history, African pride, and African economic development. Slavery was indeed a 400-year criminal economic activity that enriched Europe. In 1945 in Manchester, our political, academic, and civil luminaries left us a message of visionary clarity, which we have yet to heed. It was the message of Ubuntu and a common destiny. Unfortunately, we've not made their message our vision. We've not had the necessary generational conversations among ourselves to address reparatory justice, democracy, mutually supportive development, and how to create and sustain generational wealth for people of African descent. We have been disunited and disinterested, and in many cases, our leaders have been indifferent. Today, we are separated by geography, language, religion, spirituality, color, tradition, economic philosophy, race, ethnicity, class, culture, racism, and the daily subliminal psychological messages aimed at us. We're ashamed to embrace ourselves. We're ashamed to embrace Haiti, which has been held hostage by European and American interests as punishment for being great and showing us in Africa and the African diaspora what should be done and how it should be done. We've allowed Western religions to defang us by telling us to turn the other cheek while they practice an eye for an eye. The critical message of Sankofa from the 1945 conference was that we needed a unifying architecture to obtain independence and, more importantly, reparatory justice. We have lost the unifying knowledge of Ubuntu. I am because you are. The Berlin Conference, which was in 1884, or exactly 100 years before the Manchester Conference, has shown us that European and other colonizing nations understand the spirit of Ubuntu. They practice their own version of Ubuntu and use it against us. The COVID-19 vaccination scandal illustrates this. While COVID-19 is the current global pandemic, racism is the greatest historical and ongoing pandemic in the world, and we are the victims. The Black Lives Matter movement has highlighted the daily psychological, economic, cultural, and social man-made disease called racism. And racism has many faces and has become more sophisticated. Dr. Keen Gibson from Guyana has defined racism as a new, sophisticated political system. The Durban Declaration of 20 years ago was hijacked by the war against terrorism. And similarly, if we are not united and sophisticated in our approach, any effort for justice to people of African descent will be hijacked by climate change or by some other concocted event. Sir Hilary Beckles has stated, reparations will be the greatest political movement of the 21st century. This is so true, as reparatory justice is the moral, social, religious, economic, health, political, and financial crisis of our time. Today, we are in a life and death battle for African economic and political ascendancy. The church provided moral and social license for this criminal enterprise and must be part of the solution. Slavery accelerated, institutionalized, and popularized capitalism of the worst form. Human exploitation, death, genocide, and racism coming together to create the perfect storm of unbridled capitalism. So where do we go from here? In December 1948, we witnessed the signing of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And since then, we've had many other declarations. Durban in 2001, the International Decade of People of African Descent, 2014. We've had the Millennium Development Goals. Now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. And still, despite these approaches, racism and racial discrimination, both direct and indirect, de facto and de jure, continue to manifest themselves in inequality and African disadvantage. Globalization and capitalism, which both have their roots in chattel slavery, permeate every facet of African lives and livelihoods. We're seen still as prey. Witness the new scramble for Africa. At least we're beginning to see progress with initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So what are my recommendations? First, we need a unifying philosophy to be adopted by all people of African descent. While Pan-Africanism is the overarching framework, the principles of Kwanzaa should be adopted as the operational architecture for us. Reparations is both internal and external. It has both a software dimension as well as a hardware dimension. The software element is self-healing, how we treat each other, how we work together, how we respect our women. The 7 principles of Kwanzaa, unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and faith, provide us in Africa and the African diaspora with both the software and hardware elements of a shared future of prosperity through Ubuntu. The Caribbean Reparations Commission and the North American African Reparations Commission both have 10-point plans for reparations. Our counterparts in Europe also have a strategic vision on how to approach reparatory justice. What we need is a single, cohesive, Pan-African 10-point plan for reparatory justice that promotes our shared future. We also need to do something fundamental. We need to redefine democracy through African eyes. In essence, we need to adopt a Pan-African definition of democracy as a framework for our shared destiny, so that people of African descent and heritage have a development paradigm by defining democracy as being a market of freedoms, collective ideas, inclusive and transparent institutions, and community development. Fourth, Jews paid Jews reparations. What do I mean by that? Simply put, the strong Jewish political and economic lobbies in the United States, United Kingdom, and other wealthy countries ensured that Germany paid reparations for the Jewish Holocaust. People of African descent need the same focus. All African countries need to focus on a simple demand for reparations in the form of 1% of European GDP per year for 400 years, the length of our slavery. We need to do this. We seem to have divergent views in reparations, and this only divides and weakens us. Fifth, part of reparatory justice in the spirit of Pan-Africanism should be a strong focus on fair trade. Our countries and people of African descent are daily enslaved by contracts that are predatory, odious, and racist. We need a Pan-African vision for fair trade, not aid. Sixthly, our churches have a critical role to play in reparatory justice and Pan-Africanism. One of the deepest wounds of slavery was that people of African descent were given other religions. Strangely, African spirituality has been left behind, and Africans are the only people who pray to a God that does not look like them. We're spiritually still awaiting Godot. Can you imagine a world in which the central figure of Christianity, Jesus, was defined as what he was, a non-white person? Yet daily we are captured by lies and stories such as the Shroud of Turin. Can you imagine the cleansing power that it would have on African identity and spirituality, and how we would view ourselves?
Can you round up, my brother?
Thank you.
Thank you. You can just round up in the next minute or so.
Yes.
Thank you.
What we need most is a Pan-African movement that recreates the African Renaissance so badly needed. We need to live the spirit of Sankofa. We need to live and breed Ubuntu. We need to live Kwanzaa principles. Similarly, we need to become a unified force. Hopefully this conference will be a catalyst for such. I end by using one of my favorite Martin Garvey quotes. Up, up, you mighty race. Accomplish what you will. And we must recognize that we are not prisoners of our past, but architects of our future. I thank you.
Thank you so much, my brother. I am very happy with what you have just shared with us. Dr. Justina Caicedo Salcedo, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please, can we, for those that will not understand Portuguese, we can go to the globe at the bottom of the page and take the option for English. There is somebody to interpret. Dr. Justina. Dr. Justina, can you hear me? Okay.
Que si la escuchan.
¿Sí? ¿Me escuchan? Ah, que sí. Bueno, buenos días. Bueno, voy a iniciar. Voy a conversar sobre la niñez afro en Colombia. Los lugares de población infantil en Colombia, por inferencia, se corresponden con los de la población afro reportada por el DANE. Podemos reportar que los datos recogidos por la Comisión de Seguimiento del Auto 005 de la sentencia T025 de la Corte Constitucional dicen que la población afro representa el 22.5% de la población del total de víctimas, que al 2019 ya eran 8.8 millones y donde alrededor del 52% de este total son niños y niñas adolescentes. Respecto a la niñez afro, esta situación de desplazamiento, la misma Corte Constitucional declara en el caso de los niños, niñas y adolescentes afrodescendientes, el desplazamiento forzado genera importantes pérdidas y desarraigos que afectan su identidad, el desarrollo de su personalidad y su autoestima. Esta afectación se concreta, por ejemplo, en la rotura de la relación filio-paternal, dado que los menores ya no sienten el mismo respeto por sus padres o autoridades en una ruptura generacional que ha imposibilitado una crianza en forma adecuada y en una desestructuración de los roles dentro de la familia y la comunidad, impidiendo la comunicación de los saberes a las nuevas generaciones. Ahorita vamos a hablar de decolonizar la primera infancia. Hemos encontrado que la cultura se encuentra de modo nuclear en las categorías de lo decolonial y de lo intercultural. También lo encontramos como campo de estudio desde la psicología cultural, cuyos hallazgos son interesantes y se han de tener en cuenta por la incidencia. Ay, eso no quiere correr. Psicología en recomendaciones manuales, política pública y ciertos aspectos pedagógicos entrelazados con el desarrollo de niños y niñas. El hallazgo común a los diferentes abordajes y de ahí su denominación de psicología cultural es la mutua constitución de cultura y mente, según Marcos y Hamedani, 2007. Una breve y competente fundamentación conceptual y por demás pertinente en nuestro objetivo se encuentra en hacia una psicología cultural. Origen, desarrollo y perspectiva de Moisés Esteban Guitar, de quien citamos las mentes en diálogo entretejen conjuntamente estas tradiciones culturales y estas prácticas sociales. Por lo tanto, desde este enfoque se considera que hay una tensión irreductible. Besmas. La inferencia vital para nuestra investigación y la que lleva Guitar es que la atención constante con personas, objetos y símbolos, es decir, eso que construye y constituye la cultura, es lo que transforma y modela nuestra mente. Ahora, cuando aplicamos estas inferencias a la condición de la niña o el niño, en acuerdo con el pensamiento vigente de Vygotsky, todas las funciones superiores se originan como relaciones entre seres humanos, según Vygotsky y Martínez, que se completa en el mismo Vygotsky cuando señala la vivencia del niño es aquella simple unidad sobre la cual es difícil decir si representa la influencia del medio sobre el niño o una niña, peculiaridad del propio niño. La vivencia constituye la unidad de la personalidad y del entorno tal como figura en el desarrollo la verdadera unidad dinámica de la conciencia. Unidad ahora aquí decimos que con lo que podemos inferir que la negación de las vivencias culturales de la niña o del niño que se produce en el medio escolar de forma consciente o inconsciente tiene un impacto negativo en la formación mental de esa niña o niño y que perturba negativamente el desarrollo de su conciencia. De allí que uno de los hallazgos más perturbadores es el sistema educativo nacional y aún sus agentes educativos y las maestras no reconocen las profundas implicaciones que tiene la cultura en el desarrollo niño-contexto. Las deformaciones racializadas que la escuela, por virtud del discurso institucional o de negligente preparación de los maestros.
Can you please conclude?
Sí.
Yeah. Thank you. If you can conclude in the next minute or two.
Escuche. Esto no quiere subir. Aquí tiene. Aquí. Bueno, la de formaciones. Aquí está. La disonancia con su contexto.
Translator, can you tell her to round off in the next 2 minutes?
Ah, se acabó. Se acabó la sala. ¿Listo?
Okay, I don't know what has happened, but let me take this opportunity to bring in Mohammed to share with us also his perspectives on the, and I will ask my brother to say as much as he can in as few minutes as possible so that we try and get over this session. Thank you, Mohammed. You can go ahead. Please introduce yourself first,
Sure.
and then please go into your discussion.
Yeah, so I'm Mohammed. I am a student at the University of Cambridge in sociology and a progressive. I wanted to start by sending solidarity to my home country of Sudan. I was a participant in the Sudanese revolution, and unfortunately, this morning, a coup d'etat happened against our revolution. Which is going to be a huge obstacle to our development, but I hope for the best. So today I'll be talking about, I'll be trying to get to the end. I hope that I can, considering that we don't have much time. But the theme of this conference today is on revisiting the historical 1945 Manchester Pan-African Congress. I'd like to not touch on it just as a moral and legal case, but I'd also like to touch on how the struggle for reparations is linked intimately with self-determination and the unfinished business of decolonization. And so when we're demanding reparations, it's not just to bring up the moral case against all of the crimes committed against African people since the Portuguese first arrived in the Guinean coast in the 15th century. We're also talking about the unrealized aspiration for sovereign equality between nation states across the world. Now, to really understand this, we have to understand the burdened membership of what it means to be an African country or a country of African descendants in the international state system. And for that, I'd like us to go to 1825. Haiti had by then become the first Black republic and the first republic to emerge out of a slave revolt. But in 1825, a diplomat, Baron de Macau, had with him 14 warships armed with 528 cannons and a message from France that Haiti would have to pay reparations to its former slave owners. So now Haiti could also add to its repertoire, being one of the first countries to be imposed by way of force, because the World Bank and the WTO didn't exist at the time, the first country to incur third world debt. By 1915, 80% of Haiti's budget was designated to pay the US and French banks that Haiti borrowed money from. By 1945, according to the historian Hilary Beckles, Haiti had, as a result, been bankrupt. Now, this means that the introduction of African countries into the international state system already began with Africans being subordinated. Now let's jump to the Manchester Pan-African Congress, which we are celebrating today. In October 1945, delegates from across the world, the African world, convened in Carlton on Medlock Town Hall in Manchester to join the 5th Pan-African Congress. So people that were around in that Congress included Hastings Banda, the first Prime Minister and President of Malawi, Jomo Kenyatta, the first President of Kenya, and Kwame Nkrumah, the first President of Ghana. And the organization which organized that was called the International African Service Bureau, but you cannot understand the IASB unless you understand where it came from. It emerged itself out of an organization which emerged a decade prior in October 1935 in response to the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. Yet again, another proof that, in the words of Adam Getachew, a scholar who's written an amazing book called World Making, African countries have had burdened membership in the international state system. That includes Liberia, that includes Haiti, that includes Ethiopia, and then of course, that also includes all of the countries which went through decolonization in the Caribbean and Africa later. And so one thing to understand is that when Italy, a member of the League of Nations, invaded Ethiopia, another member of the League of Nations, African people in the world were angry. They had had enough. And in response to the invasion, for example, longshoremen in Trinidad refused to unload Italian ships. Indian and Black trade unionists united as well in Trinidad. In St. Vincent and St. Kitts, riots took place. In New York, the Communist Party in Harlem organized mass protests. And in England, a young Kwame Nkrumah reflected that the invasion was almost as if the whole of London had declared war on him personally. That's why Amy Ashwood Garvey, the Trotskyist and Pan-Africanist CLR James, and others like Chris Jones, Ras McConan came together to create the AIS, the International Friends for Ethiopia, and eventually the International African Service Bureau, which became the primary means by which the fight for decolonization was lodged in the Anglophone world. So reparations then should also be seen as our continued struggle to create a world of sovereign equals in the international state system. But that I'm, honored to be in the presence of the CARICOM members of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, because as you all know, in 2013, CARICOM established a commission to fight for reparatory justice. And the 10-point plan is not just requesting a check, it's asking for things like justice for Africans, repatriation for those who want it, the creation of cultural institutions. But for me, one of the most fascinating aspects of the 10-point plan of the CARICOM Reparations Commission is that the demand for technology transfer. The Caribbean, the mandate contends, was denied participation in Europe's industrialization process and was confined to the role of producer and exporter of raw materials. This completely was to the benefit of Europe. Now, the reason why this is so fascinating from an international diplomacy perspective is because it's one of the only resurrections and resuscitations of the demand in the 1970s and in the post-colonial moment for a new international economic order, which can recreate the world system in such a way where everyone is equal, right? And so we have to understand, for example, that at the beginning of decolonization, formation of the United Nations, there was only 51 member states. And then by 1962, that mushroomed into 110. Of the newly independent states in the General Assembly of the United Nations, 77 of them united under a radical vision, precisely that radical vision of the technology transfer demand that's in the reparations 10-point plan. They demanded, for example, that every country, that the countries who were exploited at the periphery of the world economy should come together and be given the means by which they can industrialize and become manufacturers so that they don't continue to allow the colonial dynamic that exists between the periphery and the core of the economy to continue in the post-colonial moment. And so even a General Assembly Declaration 3201, which was the demand for a new international economic order, was ratified by the G77 nations in the General Assembly, which demanded the right to control and the extraction of domestic resources, the establishment of state-managed cartels to stabilize commodity prices, the regulation of transnational corporations, and just like the CARICOM platform, a no-strings-attached technology transfer program. That program was destroyed by the neoconservative elite in the United States, by the World Bank, which pushed instead for a structural adjustment kind of new orthodoxy. And it is only for the longest time, we've talked about that story as a story of failure until 2013 with the reparations platform. And that's what I want to talk about today. That reparations should not just be seen as a moral and legal case, but it should also be seen as a renunciation of the neoliberal orthodoxy that has taken hold in much of the post-colonial world since decolonization.
Mohammed, I'm sorry, 30 seconds just to round up your main point, and then we leave because I'm now seeing that they are about to close the room.
No problem. Okay, if I could just ask just one final thought, I will say this. We do have to be careful right now as we lodge the case for reparations. We have two successful cases for reparations in Africa right now. The case of the Nama and Herero people in Namibia, who received reparations, and the case of the Mau Mau, 5,000 of them, who also received reparations. But in both cases, the amount of money that was received has been negligible, and we cannot continue to accept reparations payments which are negligible. In the Jewish Indemnifications Conference at the end of World War II, the Jewish people received $80 billion in reparations. The Mau Mau only received 19.9 million distributed between 5,000 people, while it was 1.5 million people were thrown in the camps of the Kikuyu. That is a reparations payment, which now the UK can wash its hands and say, we've paid reparations. We need to be firm with the demand for reparations. We cannot accept low payment reparations anymore. That's the final thought. I wish I could go longer, but that's—
Yes. Thank you. I also wish we had more time, but unfortunately, because of some technicalities and so on. So we have the Zoom link in the chat now. So we can click that link. It takes us back to the main session. So thank you. I'm sorry, Ron Daniels, I wasn't seeing if he was in. He should have also contributed, but that didn't happen. So we can go back to the main platform, and I hope we'll have further opportunities to continue discussing. Thank you all the panelists, and thank you to all the participants that were in this breakout room. Thank you. So we meet in the main platform.